Well, hi everybody, Father Alex here. Welcome to another episode of the Godcast. My guest this week on the Godcast is Lisa McKenzie. Lisa is an expert, an academic, looking at issues of poverty and social injustice. So I'm looking forward to having a conversation with her. If you do enjoy the discussion, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel or follow me on X at AlexDJFrost or check me out on Facebook. Just look for the Godcast. But for now, I hope you enjoy this brand new Godcast with Lisa McKenzie. Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast this week is Lisa McKenzie. Lisa is somebody who's got the same kind of interests as I am. We're going to be talking about poverty, and before you switch off, that's not just about bad news. We're going to bring some light to that as well, hopefully. So, Lisa, thanks for coming on the Godcast. How are you?
I'm all right, yeah. I've got my cup of tea in my Dolly Parton mug. Who don't like a bit of Dolly?
Who don't like a bit of Dolly? Yeah.
You know,
You've got a Nottingham twang there. I can detect it.
can
It-
you?
yeah, I can. I've had a few people from Nottingham on the Godcast, and John Law, the darts player, who's not far from you. He's in Chesterfield, which is not far
Yeah,
away, is it? So, yeah.
no,
So,
but yeah, well, yeah. I mean, the Nottingham twang. It's interesting that you've said that because most people can't place it,
yeah,
but I think we've got a fantastic accent. I think it's brilliant.
yeah. I love
So
accents, Lisa. Just as a byproduct, I love the regional accents. You know, I'm in Burnley, and people in Blackburn have got a Lancashire accent, but it's different to
yeah,
mine. You know, and I'm sure you find that down
yeah.
there.
Well, you've just sort of lumped me in with Chesterfield, and I know we've got a totally different accent.
Yeah. Anyway, this is all nice, but it's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk a few things about social injustice and poverty. But before we do, Lisa, just a bit about yourself. You know, what was your own upbringing like? Just say a bit about that if you would.
Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, I mean, we go back to the accents. I come from a place called Sutton in Ashfield, which is in Nottinghamshire, but it's kind of on the border of Derbyshire. So we're actually only a few miles away from Chesterfield, although they're Derbyshire and we're Nottinghamshire. So I was brought up in it's a mining community. It's absolutely steeped in mining life. Sutton in Ashfield, it's a small town. It's actually growing. It's actually no, it's a large town, but it had five or six pits sort of on at the heart of it. So when say pits, I mean coal mines, and almost everybody that I know worked at the pit, worked down the mine, or their families, somebody worked down the mine. So I grew up. I was born in '68. I was born to very well. I'm not even going to say working class because everybody says that, but my granddad was a coal miner. His everybody in my family were coal miners. My uncles, my cousins, the next door neighbours, everybody was coal miners. And I grew up in a very big family, actually. My mum had me when she was quite young, very young, actually. And so, as was very normal in them days, you lived with your grandparents. It was a very, it was a very normal thing, really. That if there was a what they called an unmarried mother at the time, is that you would just live with your grandparents and you would be brought up as another child. So my grandma and granddad had got nine kids. And so in effect, even though I slept with my mum and, and I was almost like the 10th kid. So, we lived in a council house, on a council estate in Sutton in Ashfield. Um, and my childhood was very, very happy, lots and lots of people. Imagine all those people, bustling and talking and, sort of very short, small age, I was sort of asking questions and stressing people out because I'd been brought up with all these adults. Unfortunately, when I was only 5, my grandma and granddad both died. And loss has been a massive part, I think, of my life. Losing my grandma and granddad when I was very young, My mum was only 22 when they died, and then she got younger brothers and sisters that were in the house as well. And at the time, we lived in a council house, and the council, and it still does it today, that the person whose name is on the rent book had died. So therefore, they expected the rest of the family to move out. And so at a very young age, I knew what homelessness was. My mum fought tooth and nail to keep that house, and she did. So, very young woman with brothers and sisters who were younger and me. And really, I say thank God, but I do thank God that we kept that house, because that council house probably made the difference to the rest of my life. It really did.
It's
Um,
really interesting to hear you kind of just say how, from such a young age, how kind of, to me, even the thought that somebody would be asked to leave a house is just beyond consideration, really, particularly if they've nowhere to go. But for you to have exposure to that as a young person, and I guess alongside
yeah, I
that,
was
Lisa,
5.
yeah, that's crazy. And I guess alongside that, you said you were born in '68. I was born in '69, and one of my earliest memories about kind of, well, I suppose disagreement was the miners' strike, and I can vividly see those images of Arthur Scargill and all the
Yeah.
riots and the the pain and suffering from both sides. Growing up, was that part of your growing up and
Yeah.
shaping you as well?
Well, yeah, because what happened is, my mum then got married, and I had a lovely dad who's still with me actually now, still with us today. And my dad was a miner, and everybody in the family was miners, and like I said, the community that I came from, it was a very mining community, for good and bad, because those communities were tight and solid, but were quite insular in how they saw the world. They saw the world through those very tight community networks. My dad, when the strike came along, my mum, again, and I think it's because of her own life and her own journey, she worked in a factory. She made tights, uh, and she worked at the Pretty Polly. All my aunties worked at everybody worked at the Pretty Polly, to be honest. We either worked down the pit or we were making tights. Um, and she became very political, and her whole life was committed to the trade union movement
Right.
and to fighting for the rights of other working class people. I grew up with a very strong sense that I was working class. I knew exactly what that was from being a tiny child. My granddad said to me, "We're not the richest people and we don't have a lot, but we keep the lights on because we are that important."
Mm.
I grew up with that. I actually believed that.
Yeah.
I thought that we were the most important things. I remember as a kid, I was like, "Oh God, I'm so lucky. I was brought up working class, in this mining community." I actually thought I was lucky. And then in 1984, obviously the strike started to, there was the musings of it, that Mrs. Thatcher wanted to close down the mining industry. She wanted to make people redundant. She wanted to throw people out their jobs. I was 16. I was just 16. And imagine, again, it's another existential crisis. This is what working class people face all the time, is imagine, we all knew what would happen if we could imagine that if every pit closed where we lived, what would that do to us? All those people out of work, the knock-on effects, the little cafes, the pubs, who relied on miners' wages.
Mm.
So for my family, it was, for my mum, who was like the driving force here, we're on strike. And remember, we lived in Nottinghamshire. So that decision to go on strike was not the popular opinion, really, in Nottinghamshire. So on the 9th of March 1984, that was my 16th birthday. And that was the day that my dad, he went to work, the Yorkshire pickets were there, and he came home. And then he was on strike for the whole year. Within a couple of months, I mean, that day I was 16, and it was such a busy day because my dad brought home with him, my uncles, and they were sat in our house, and my mum was organising everybody. This is what we're going to do. We're going to do this. We're going to do that, and that really was the start of that year. I never went back to school after that time. So even though March you weren't supposed to leave school, I just left. I hated it anyway. I hated school. And my mum said there was no point going back. You weren't going to teach me anything else. And I knew that I was going to go and work at the Pretty Polly with her anyway. So I started to help out with the Women Against Pit Closures movement. So, it was all the women getting together. And we sort of formed a group. We asked for funding. We got other trade unionists to help us, and we set up a strike centre. And from that, we did breakfasts, packed lunches. We were like the centre of the strike, really. So that was my 84 to 85 year.
It's so interesting, Lisa, because what you've got me thinking about, Burnley was a pit town, full of industrial heritage, as you will know. But what you've just dropped a little light bulb in my head. I've written a book called August to Alter. I'm not plugging it particularly, but people who follow my podcast will know about it. And in there, I write about what you just mentioned there about, you felt lucky to be in that community. And when I write about the modern day urban estate and its community, when I'm trying to give a positive narrative, what you say really resonates with me, because I see communities there where mums are still very much the kind of steerer of things, and I described them in my book as kind of the Elsie Tanners and the Ina Sharples and the Hilda Ogdens, the modern day version of those strong, independent women, often single parents in my case. But maybe, but also a real sense of community where all the kids still play out on the estate with
Yeah.
and they don't come in till it's dark, where that doesn't happen in the rural villages. They're not allowed off the driveways. So I'm absolutely fascinated by what you're saying. It's just reminding me there about maybe the generational heritage, the kind of the gene thread that's been passed on to these
Yeah.
communities. Is that
Yeah.
fair?
That's absolutely spot on. And I wrote a book in 2015. It was called Getting By. And I wrote that about the council estate that I lived on at the time. And that was, so I lived in I grew up in the mining communities, which, as you know, were sort of semi-rural. Because the mines, when they were sunk, they were sunk in rural areas. And then I'm sort of moving on again. By the time I was 18, I'd met someone from Nottingham City, and I was having a baby, and I then moved to the city centre, and I lived on a council estate right in the city centre, which was very different to the mining communities. The city centre estate, it was very mixed estate, completely different, really. But at the heart of it was the same ethos that we are a community, our families are here. We know everybody. We know what we know where our things work. And I wrote a book in 2015 about that council estate. And at the very heart of that was this idea that community still lived, and that people still resonated with it and still saw themselves positively connected to it. So, when I did my PhD, I was doing this research, and I went round the estate and interviewed mums. Because again, women right at the heart of all working class communities, they hold it together, sometimes forcibly if they have to. And talking to women on the estate that I lived on then, when you said to people, tell me a bit about yourself, like you've done to me, the first thing they would say was, I'm typical St. Anne's. That was the estate, the St. Anne's estate. And so being typical St. Anne's was you connected to where you lived. And I would just go, all right, yeah, okay. Because I knew what being typical St. Anne's meant. When I went back to the university and, they were reading the work that I was writing, they were like, well, what does that mean? I said, what do you mean? It was like, well, all these people are saying that they're St. Anne's, they're typical St. Anne's. Well, what does that mean? And I was like, it means that they're St. Anne's. Well, obviously, the academics at the University of Nottingham did not know that. And so then I had to start really unpicking what that meant.
Mm.
And it really meant, community, certain sets of values, a sense that you were living in a collected sort of perhaps identity space. And also, I suppose the big thing was that other people didn't like you.
Mm.
And that was very much part of that narrative as well, because St. Anne's inner city estate that was linked to drugs, gangs, single parents, and was always known as the bad place. And yet the people who lived there knew, they took that and sort of said, well, they think that's what we are,
Mm.
but actually this is what we are.
Mm.
So that sort of pushing against that narrative, and no one likes us and we don't care, that was very much part of being St. Anne's.
Yeah, I completely get that, and the other people that I think the other people who I talk to
Mm.
can't understand why I love working in that environment so much.
Yeah,
Being
yeah,
among that community, I'm not going to lie, it is an absolute roller coaster of joy and despair. You'll understand that,
yes, yeah,
but
yeah,
God, it's so good, Lisa. It's so enriching. It's funny. It's
yeah,
sad. It's everything.
yeah,
And people say, "Oh, do you not fancy a move?" It's like, no, because where else can I'm a Burnley boy as well, which
yeah,
makes it really special. But where else can I get this kind of? It's almost like an addiction, really. I
yeah.
love it. I can't let go of it. But obviously there are some challenges in that, Lisa. If I can just ask you about some of those. So, um. I wanted to ask you about the recent news about the two-tier cap being removed for
Yeah.
families. And I've got a view, but before I shove my two pence in, I'd like to know what your immediate reaction to that was.
I mean, I was very happy that that had happened. I was very happy. um it's been surprising. Well, it's not surprising because it's never ending. The way that sort of the narrative about working class people, having, that fear of women having lots of children that then, sort of infiltrate society in a bad way. I think that's what's at the root of that sort of two-child cap, is that poor people, or people that, oh, not even poor people really, most people who are on universal credit work. People, working class people, that somehow, if working class people have loads of kids, in the mind, that it kind of infects, because it's like inherently these people are bad. They've got something wrong with them. And therefore, if they have kids, they will ruin society. That's always been with us, for hundreds of years, actually. Um, I'm an academic, I'm a sociologist, and when I was researching, when I was doing a PhD, I started to look into these ideas of stigma and where they came from. And, and in the Victorian times, there was these ideas were very, these were where this sort of idea of morality and poverty started to meet. And I think that's what, well, I know that's what's happened with the two-child cap, is ideas of morality are sort of crashing in that very Victorian way into family life. And, the judgment about people being able to afford children. And it's always been with us, always. When I was a young mom, and I put my name down on the council list. I got a little boy, and the condescension from the other side of that desk
Yeah.
was awful. Do you know,
Yeah.
now if I could go back, I swear, I would probably start punching people in the face because what they were doing to us. When I lived in a one-bedroom flat, and my son was getting older, and I phoned the council and said, is there any chance that I could get 2 bedrooms? And the woman at the other side of the desk said, well, you should have thought of that before, shouldn't you? And that sort of attitude was, my son's 37 now. It was with my mum. When my mum went and asked for help, she was a young woman. She'd got a terrible thing had happened. She went to, social services, see if she could get any help. This would have been the 70s. And, their response was, well, you're a young woman. Haven't you got clothes and records you could sell? By the 80s, when I was in a similar position, it was, well, you should have thought of that before, shouldn't you? Sort of the morality of my sex life. And then again, with the 2-child cap, that came in again, that morality that sort of, this is how you should be behaving. And so when the 2-child cap was lifted, I was happy. But I don't think it's changed anything, to be honest. It's changed something for some families.
Yeah.
But actually, it won't have changed that much. And it won't have changed any of these ideas.
Yeah.
In fact, it's probably strengthened them.
I kind of sensed that was coming, and I'm really glad it has. I think, oh God, Lisa, you've opened up a whole world for me. What you said there about that condescension from the person that you were talking to is...
I call them the other side of the desk.
Yeah, well, you remind me of a situation where I went with a homeless chap to try and get him a house. He was living on a mattress, and that level of condescension and that humiliation where he was speaking on one of these phones that everybody can hear you talking.
Yeah.
I wanted to smash the place up. I was so angry, and it's that sense of, but actually, there's a couple of things that if I can just add and be interested to know what you think. This idea, what frustrates me is Keir Starmer and numerous Labour MPs were going, we are lifting 250,000 people out of poverty, and I'm going, you're not. You're just not.
You're not. No.
And it really wound.
Well, it actually went up. By
Yeah.
the next day, it was 500,000.
Yeah.
I'm sure by now it's at least 4 million.
Yeah. And it's like, I think politicians or people who don't really understand poverty just think it's about pound notes.
Yeah.
It's just about giving people more money. And again, I don't want to keep banging on about my book, and I'm sure I think poverty is so much more than dosh. It's about aspiration. It's about opportunity. It's about well-being. It's about health. And actually, the irony of what we've been talking about is the poverty that we think is with us, or the people that we're helping. It's actually with the person that sat at the desk. Is that person lacks the moral compassion and empathy towards the situation. That we're in this cycle of poverty that's just going round and round and round.
Well, I'm going to pull you up on one thing there.
Yeah.
Aspiration.
Yeah.
I hate that word. I mean, hate it, because that is the word that is always used about us, that somehow we haven't got the aspiration, and all we need to do is give these people aspiration, and that's good enough. And that is not my experience of working class people. Working class people, and this is where this gets a bit controversial. If anything, working class people have got too much aspiration. Because the reality is, when you are 3, 4, 5 years old and you go, when I grow up, I want to be this. The truth is that's not going to happen to you, because social mobility has stopped. So therefore, you're not going to be, if you come from a council estate, you're not going to be a doctor. You're not going to be a lawyer. That's not, there will be a few that get through. But on the balance, that's not going to happen to you. And I don't know, it's about 2017. I was invited to Parliament to be on a select committee as a witness about it's about class and whether or not the term working class should be a protected characteristic. So that means that you can't discriminate by law against certain protected characteristics, race, religion, disability, age, sex. These are protected characteristics. So if you discriminate based on that, it's illegal. But being poor is not. So, or being working class, or being of low economic stature. So you can be discriminated against if you are working class, and it happens all the time. And I remember being in Parliament and this MP saying to me this very same thing about aspiration. Oh, it's just that they don't have aspiration. And she was a Tory MP for Plymouth or somewhere. And I said, can you explain that to me? I knew, I'm a girl off a council estate. Don't put me with these people because I'll run rings round you. So I went, can you just explain this to me? She said, well, yes. I was in a school last week, a junior school. And, when I was talking to the children and I was trying to get them to be aspirational. And I said to them, what is it that you want to be when you grow up? And she said, and most of them wanted to bake cupcakes and have cupcake shops. And this was in Parliament. And I was like, well, what's wrong with that? I said, they want to be local business owners. They want to make nice things for their community. That is that's completely aspirate. What is wrong with that? And she went, oh, perhaps that was a bad example. Not understanding for a minute about those kids and how they saw their world. So for me, and what I said to them is aspiration is one thing that we do have. What we don't have, as you said, was then the opportunity.
Yeah.
And so the aspiration is always there. The opportunity is not. And when we're looking at this sort of thing, we look at it from the wrong way round. We look at it from the bottom. What can we do to these people? We should be looking at it from the top. What can we do to those people?
Yeah.
Because and I said this in Parliament, I've said it ever since, the middle class, their sharp elbows, the way that they game the system, the way that they understand the system, we never look at that. We look at the bottom and go, what should we do to them? Well, let's look at the middle and the up. What should we do to them?
Yeah.
Let's have quotas. Imagine quotas. In Parliament, you've got to have, say, I don't know, 40% of the population is working class. Let's have 40% of the population of Parliament working class. Or whatever. But we always look at this from the bottom. It's a bottom problem. It's not a bottom problem.
Lisa, you're pressing my buttons big time, and this is a little bit niche, but I'm a Church of England vicar, and I'm proudly a working class vicar. And just this year, I set up a private members' motion. I'm on the General Synod, the governing body of the church, which people who watch this will know, for more working class vocations that there are, and I came from a place of guilt, really. Like, I thought I was too thick to be a vicar. I thought I was not worthy of being a vicar, and people describe me now as a professional, after working in retail all my working life, and then to hear voices of just within the niche space of the church from working class people go, do you know, that's exactly what we feel. That's how we felt for all our lives, that we're not worthy, and that we've got to prove to those above us that we're worthy. And, and as you've been talking, I know there'll be people watching that who maybe not met you before and thought, who's this woman, and then you reveal that you're a PhD educated academic. There are people above who think, well, no way, and they are the challenges that lie before us, aren't they?
They are, and what we have to do is we have to keep making these arguments. I get a lot of stick off everybody. Middle class tell me that I'm now not working class because I'm an academic. Why? Why am I not working class? Because you're an academic. Well, bad luck for you, mate, because I was brought up actually on council estates all my life. We deal with people like you all the time. It's water off a duck's back. So when you say to me, you're no longer working class because you've got a PhD, my response to that is what you're saying, that working class people can't read books. They can't write books because that's what you're saying. The minute we do something like that, all of a sudden we're not working class anymore. And it's to make them feel comfortable. Well, I'm not really bothered about them feeling comfortable. In fact, I want you to feel as uncomfortable as I can make you.
Yeah, I agree with that, Lisa. But they're one of the challenges, certainly in an institution, and I know you won't be a huge fan of institutions, but those people do hold the power, and I think they're frightened in many respects. They see the challenge from somebody maybe like myself. It's like, well, you're actually we like what you're saying, but we won't, and we'll let you in a little bit, but we
Yeah.
won't relinquish the power. How do
Yeah.
you feel we break that challenge down?
Well, this is why I suppose I believe, and this is where I said, I know how bad things can be and actually are and becoming increasingly worse. I know that people are surviving on very little money with very little hope. Very little. The hope is being distinct. It's being diminished daily, actually, at the moment. But I do always have hope in us because, my whole life, my mother's life, my grandmother's life, you know, terrible things have happened to us, but they come through it.
Mm,
And it is something about, the fight in us. And I know not all of us have that fight. I know that because I know, I go to people and meet people who have lost that fight. But I haven't, and you haven't. And so I believe in us.
mm,
And I think that yeah, they don't let us in, or they let us in a little bit, or they keep us sort of wrapped up in promises that never happen. But I don't mean we can't do things for ourselves, because we can.
mm,
And that's where I believe in us. The way that we can, when my dad went on strike, my mum, right, we need a strike centre. We need to feed people. We need to be organised. That's what we've always done. We've
mm,
always done that. So, and it doesn't mean all of us can do that. Some of us are that, I remember in the strike, some young women. I mean, my mum was only a young woman. She's only like 30 or whatever. But, younger women, 20 and got two kids already or three kids, and their husband was on strike, and those women were struggling. That meant we all lifted them. And that is how I've always seen
mm.
working class communities. I've always seen us that way, that some of us can shoulder it. And if you can, then do it, because you're doing it for us.
Yeah.
And and it's, you work on council estates, women will just set things up. Right, okay, what do we need? We need a clothes bank. All right, let's do it.
Mm,
Who's going to do it? Oh, it'll have to be me again.
mm,
But they do. You will always get that, and that's where I've always got hope and faith in us.
yeah.
And so when they don't let us in, and I know, and it's heartbreaking when they don't. It is. It really is. When you've worked hard, you've shown, all the things that they want to see of you. And then they still don't let you in. I mean, it is the story of the working class, really,
Mm,
that we never. My mum said, and she said Dennis Skinner said this to her. She said that the working class, she says, they lose miles at a time, but they only can win an inch at a time. And I think that's what actually happens
mm,
to us is, we've pushed forward with little bits, little bits, little bits, and then, something happens
mm.
and we go again. But the point in that is we do win an inch at a time, and we keep inching.
Yeah.
And, that's might be a false hope, but it is a hope.
Mm. Well, Lisa, I could talk to you for hours, but I'm mindful of time, and I think that's probably a good place to finish. And yeah, and hopefully people have been interested to. God, I could just ask you so many questions, but I like to keep my podcast to 30 minutes, 40 minutes. But Lisa, it's been fascinating talking to you, and people can check you out. You're online, and if they want to know more, and then just say thanks for what you do, and thanks for coming on the podcast. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.